war crimes. On Wednesday of this week, the UN said that the Ethiopian government was finally allowing them to come in, which will include almost 100,000 Eritrean refugees who have been living in Tigray. Joining me to talk about all of this is Tigray Gabriel Michael, a Tigrayan activist in Sweden. Tigray, thank you for joining me.
Thank you so much, Teresa, for having me. Thank you.
I wanted to first begin, you and I spoke by phone earlier this week about how you had been unable to get a hold of your family for several weeks since the beginning of November, actually. Have you been able to reach them at all recently?
Not at all. The situation hasn't changed. So for the last 31 days now, the government has imposed a blanket blackout of all sorts of communication, be it internet or telephony or any other form of communication. So I haven't been able to hear from my family or friends or anyone from Tigray. It's just news to me. Nobody from outside Tigray has been able to reach to Tigray for the last 1 month. So the situation hasn't changed.
I read where the telecommunications have been coming back online. Is that what you're hearing too, or is that kind of just something that the Ethiopian federal government is saying?
Well, one of the difficult things has been the fact that there is only one version of the story. So we only get to hear from the government, and like you say, the government has been saying over the last 3 days that in the areas that they have control of, they have managed to restore communication. So those are in the southern part of Tigray and in the western part of Tigray. So the government has said that it has restored communication, but I haven't been able to verify that, and neither have I seen any independent reporting about any sort of communication being restored. So I can't really tell whether or not that is true.
Okay. Can you tell me a little bit more about the TPLF, especially its history with the federal government?
So maybe I should, if I may, take you on a little detour about the whole development of this situation. Yeah. So the TPLF is a Tigray-based party that was formed in the 1974 or 5. It waged a guerrilla warfare against the dictatorship that was ruling Ethiopia back then, the Derg government. And after 17 years, it managed to topple the Derg regime in Ethiopia. And in, I think, 1991, it established a coalition of ethnic-based parties, like 4 parties, of which the TPLF was a member, and then there was another party that represented the Oromo people, another party that represented the Amhara people, and another party that represented the southern peoples and nations and nationalities. That is the terminology they use. And that party was called the EPRDF, Ethiopian People's Revolutionary Front. Now, one of the accusations that some commentators at least, throw at the TPLF is that for the subsequent 27 years, it has dominated Ethiopian politics, and that the other parties were only puppets of the TPLF. That is the accusation that people make of the TPLF. But anyway, the current Prime Minister, Abiy Ahmed, was a top-tier member of the Oromo People's Democratic Front, which was one of the parties that made up the EPRDF. And in the year 2028, people had enough with the EPRDF. There were space of demonstrations, protests, and all kind of chaos and disturbances. And the party embarked on making some basic reformations, some basic change. And Abiy Ahmed came to power as part of solving the problems that the people were protesting against. So that is how he came to power. But as soon as he came to power, he essentially said that all the problems that had inflicted the country for the previous 27 years had been entirely due to only TPLF and nothing else. So that is when the problem between the federal government of Abiy Ahmed and the TPLF emerged, when as soon as he was sworn in as prime minister, like a big chunk of his speech consisted of accusing the TPLF of essentially sending the country into darkness for the previous 27 years. And then he went on to dismantle the APRDF and create the PP, which is the ruling party today. And the TPLF was totally essentially expelled, disparaged from the party. They weren't included. And that's when the tension, the friction between TPLF and the PP, which is essentially the EPRDF without the TPLF. That's how the problem started, I think.
The government has said that their side of the story is, at least what I've read, is that the conflict began when the TPLF killed some of their soldiers. And I'm certainly not an expert on the Ethiopian country, but just from keeping up from a lot of East Africa experts, many that I respect, they seem split on this issue. Some are saying that the TPLF is in the right, the government is in the right. What do you think that people internationally are missing about this conflict?
I think one of the major issues that people from the international media haven't really understood, in my opinion, is the fact that the prime minister has been saying for the last 2 years that he was planning to invade Tigray. There was one occasion when he went on TV and said that he was going to make women and children of Tigray wail and cry because he was planning to bomb them. He said that after the TPLF, alongside the Tigray people, decided to hold an election in defiance to the federal government's decision to postpone the election in June or May of this year, and because he thought that TPLF holding an election in a regional election essentially was essentially compromising his authority. So instead of negotiating with the TPLF, or instead of dialogue, or instead of solving the problems through a political mechanism, a political means, he said that he was going to solve it using force. And since then, he was always looking for an excuse, for a palatable excuse to invade Tigray. And that excuse essentially came in what you implied happened on the 3rd or 4th of November. I don't remember which date it was. I think it was on the night of the 4th of November, where the government alleged that the TPLF attacked a military base. But although on the surface that looks a plausible cause, actually, if you anyone who had been following Ethiopian politics would tell you that this was a war that was always coming, and that the government was looking to conjure up some like acceptable excuse to invade Tigray. So that's my understanding, and I think that is what the international media hasn't really grasped from my understanding.
Ethiopia is a pretty big country, a lot of groups, a lot of regions. How is the rest of the country? I mean, we're not talking about the whole country here. We're talking about one region. Do you get the sense that the other regions, particularly in the south, are supporting one side or the other?
I think because there is one like correct opinion now in Ethiopia, if you say anything that could even in the remotest sense be construed as opposing the war, then you go to jail. So the only voices that you hear from other parts of the country are people supporting the war. So people who are against the war, they can't really voice their opinion. So it's extremely difficult what percentage of the country or what percentage of the people are in support of Abiy's adventure in Tigray and what percentage are against it. So it's difficult to tell because no one has been able to go and interview people, and the government doesn't allow any voice that it doesn't think is good for it now. So it's very difficult for me to tell, but my gut feeling is that people have been brainwashed into thinking that the TPLF has caused a lot of problems, and that whatever is being done against Tigray in the name of punishing the TPLF is justifiable. You get the sense that many people have been completely sold on the government's narrative.
I was listening to an interview on France 24 today. The Ethiopian ambassador to France, other high-ranking officials have come out and said that because the Ethiopian federal government has reclaimed Mekelle, that the conflict is over, that there's nothing to see here anymore. I mean, you're saying you still can't get a hold of your family. Do you think that this conflict is over?
Far from it. Actually, the story around, although there is no question that Mekelle has fallen to the federal government, the manner in which it did is a contested story. So the TPLF said that it made a strategic concession or a strategic retreat because it feared that if they kept on fighting from Mekelle, then Abiy was going to essentially cause bloodbath in the city, and that they had to go to other less populated areas to avoid civilian casualty and other kind of material destruction. Whereas the federal government said that it had forcefully controlled the city. So the story around how it fell is not one that has been settled. So it depends on whom you listen to. As to whether or not I think the war will come to an end anytime soon, I actually think, as do many other commentators, the war has actually just begun, and it's being now waged from the mountains and from remote areas. And from my understanding, the war will intensify and it will drag on. So despite the government's propaganda that the war has been over, actually that's what the federal government has been saying over the last couple of days, that the war has essentially been over. But there are reports of even today that there has been bombardments and bombings of small cities in Tigray. So in every sense, the war is raging as we speak.
What else do you expect to come in the next few weeks?
Well, my hope, if not my expectation, my hope is that the international community will wake up to what is happening, because for me, it's a crisis of biblical proportion that really needs intervening by the major powers, and they should really bring them to the table, and they should minimize the amount of civilians being killed and fleeing to neighboring countries like Kenya and Sudan. Even Sudan is now flooded with thousands of Tigrayan refugees, and I read reports today that the number of people there is more than Sudan is capable of settling and feeding. So the international community should really avert this crisis. In terms of what I expect, the TPLF, and as far as the war is concerned, the TPLF has the full support of the Tigray people, and the people and the TPLF seem, from what I can see, absolutely determined to keep on fighting until the forces of Abiy Ahmed leave Tigray, and because I don't see them leaving anytime soon, I don't see the war coming to an end anytime soon. That's my fear, actually.
Takai, before I let you go, is there anything else that you want to share? A question maybe that I didn't ask you?
Well, I think not many people understand the magnitude of the crisis unfolding. I think if it was in any other place, the crisis would be on the front page of all major newspapers. But now it doesn't even get a sniff on the back page of newspapers, and that to me is something that I can't understand. So I would really like to first of all thank you for trying to bring this to the attention of your audience, and I would like to call upon other international media and other international bodies to really understand the magnitude and do everything they can to stop the killings and devastations of thousands of civilians. That's what I would say, Teresa.
Takai, thank you so much for joining me.
Appreciate it. Thank you so much.
That's it for this special look from HAPS and Quick Hits News. Join us next time.